President of the National Education Association. We have Brad Smith, the President of Microsoft, and we have Carmel Martin, who's a Senior Policy Advisor with the Biden-Harris campaign. So we're thrilled to have all of our panelists with us. But before we get going with them, I'm happy to introduce Ted Kellner to give us some welcoming remarks and to help kick off this discussion. Ted is the honorary chairman of the Democratic National Convention and is a proud Milwaukee native. And Ted, I wish we could be there with you in person in Milwaukee, enjoying the sights and sounds of your great city. But thank you for joining us nonetheless to help welcome us and kick off this discussion. Over to you, Ted.
Thank you, Ed, and welcome everybody. And I will tell you this, Ed, nobody is more sorry than myself and the committee that we could not welcome all of you wonderful folks to our city. We indeed have a great city on a great lake, and we've worked hard to welcome you and give you a warm Wisconsin, Milwaukee welcome, which unfortunately we cannot do. But let me assure you, the red carpet is open to any and all of you, and if you want to call me directly, I would give you a tour of this great city. I just want to take a second to welcome everybody, but also give a little background. How did Ted Kellner get here? None of you really know me, but in my business career, most of which has been in Milwaukee, when I started in Wilmington, Delaware. And my wife, Mary, who's been an educator her entire life, taught at Friends School. And at Friends School, the first person she met was Valerie Biden. And the next person that we met together were Joe and Natalie, Joe's wife. And Joe became, and his family became one of Mary's and my best friends in Wilmington. Little known fact, Joe and I played City League football and basketball together. I will tell you, I made Joe great as a wide receiver, but he will tell me he was a better quarterback. We became though very good friends, and Joe drafted my first will. And in 1972, 48 years ago, I was Joe's finance chair when he ran, and as you all know, won as the youngest senator. He was 29 and 72, the Senate seat against Cale Boggs. So Joe, his family, Valerie, Jill have been friends of the Kellners for many, many years. And we were hoping to spend much time with Joe and the family and all of you in Milwaukee. The other fact, before I turn back to Ed, I want to say, while I have not had the pleasure to meet Brad Smith, and I know this entire panel and the wealth of knowledge, as Ed said, they bring to this discussion on education and the gaps. Brad, I know, is also a Badger, even though he's in Seattle, and he professes to be a Seattle football fan. I do know that at a panel when he was with your esteemed coach, Mr. Carroll, Brad rather had a Badger, Wisconsin Green Bay Packer shirt underneath his suit that day. So he is really a closet Packer fan. And Ed, I'm sorry I spilled the beans on that, but I know that is the truth. So anyway, enough about me. Please come to Milwaukee. We'd love to have you here. I look forward to this panel discussion on education. It's very near and dear to Mary's and my heart. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ed.
Thank you so much, Ted. Really appreciate those opening remarks and the great stories that we can use to with Brad and I guess the Vice President as well. For those of you joining us at home, if you would like to join the discussion with us, please send us an email as you're listening to the different panelists speak. You can email us at info@businessfwd.org, and I will read the questions out loud to our panelists. And please include where you live in your message. Again, that's info@businessfwd.org. So we're going to start today with Lily Garcia. Lily is the president of the National Education Association, and she is really one of the most well-respected and influential labor leaders in our country, and it's so wonderful to have her with us. And I'm going to kick it over to you, Lily.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I want to begin. I hope I don't intimidate any one of these incredible panelists, but I think you should know I have a master's degree in instructional technology, which I got in 1983 on an Atari 800, because who was ever going to need more than 64K? So I want to acknowledge that I am an expert on Oregon Trail, and maybe we've moved a little past that. Technology isn't a video game to educators now. Technology has changed the game for so many educators, so many students. It's how we teach. It's how we learn. It is not a luxury item. It is indoor plumbing. It's how you assign research projects. It's how you verify information in a class discussion in real time. It's how you interview another student half a world away. It's how you publish your poem. It's how you group edit your short story. We use it in 1,000 different ways, at least. That's how it works if you live in certain zip codes. The gap in access to technology isn't something that was brought about by this pandemic. We were talking about the technology gap, the homework gap, long before a pandemic. And now because the school buildings are closed and teaching and learning has to continue, the only safe way to deliver instruction right now is through connective technology. And for kids who didn't have that much in their schools, they're the ones who are more likely to have little in their homes. And what I want to say here is that this is the point where reporters will often jump up and tell me, well, if that's true, then we've got to get those schools open, we've got to get back to in-person instruction, especially for those kids who have so little. And I want to make it really clear, no one wants to welcome kids back into our classrooms more than the educators, more than the teachers. We hate Zoom classes. We hate them. We just hate them. And it's not the technology. It's that we miss our kids. We want to have a chat with them, not in a chat box. I'm a hugger. I want to hug students. And right now, we know that what we're going through is very serious. We know that with the infection rates of COVID soaring in too many places, if we do this wrong, someone could die. So we're not talking about the best ways to deliver instruction in a regular world. We're talking about in a COVID world right now. And by the way, if we had done what other countries started doing back in February, we wouldn't be in this position. We still have no national plan. We still have not one federal dollar of assistance to open schools safely. We have reckless orders. We have insane threats from Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos that are causing fear and chaos. So there's that. And so not because of them, but in spite of them, we're having to be the adults in the room, the educators, the parents, the people in the community who want to listen to the health experts, the educators who want to move to in-person instruction where it's safe and when it's safe, and open with all the safety precautions of distancing, disinfecting, the masks, the health screenings. And I'm so impressed with governors like Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan and Michelle Lujan Grisham in New Mexico. They're partnering with people who know what they're talking about, and their leadership has kept students safe, allowed necessary flexibility for local school districts to start working on detailed plans on how to open schools when it's safe. And you're hearing educator voices in Los Angeles and Arlington and Wilmington saying, the educators, the parents, the local leaders are going to do this right. We're going to develop plans. And all of those plans that are being carefully developed right now involve some level of distance learning. If you're going to follow the health experts on social distancing, you're going to be looking at staggering morning and afternoon sessions, or going to alternate day models, or saying for the next, maybe for the first month, we'll be doing online learning. The expectation is that teaching and learning has to continue in the student's home in many of these plans. And what we know is that for so many students, the only technology they have in their home is mom's cell phone, and she takes it with her to work. There's no extra tablet, there's no laptop, there's no Wi-Fi. And in the best plans, we are insisting that you start with the hardest problems. You start with the students who need the most. You lead with equity. You have to solve the big problems first, or you'll never get to them. Solve the funding problem. Please, Mitch McConnell, if you'd just take a vote on the HEROES Act, we would have immediately over $4 billion for home Wi-Fi, for school technology. You solved the problem of the best way to deliver hardware and home and community hotspots. You solved the problem of educating parents on how to use that technology so they can help their kids at home. You don't assume that everybody already knows. And none of that is easy, but it's not impossible. We have to be working now. We should have been working since March when the school buildings first closed, but districts didn't have funding to move on. Now there is no choice. We have to do it right. And we're not going to accept the false choice of a broken system where distance learning disadvantages our most vulnerable students, or asking them to risk their health and their lives by opening in-person instruction at school before it's too late. That's a false choice. Distance learning right now will save lives. So we need to do it. We're going to do it right. And if we do it right, it is an infrastructure that is going to outlive this pandemic and actually put us in a better place. Might we say that we would build it back better? Someone should use that. But that's the teacher's perspective. So thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Lily. That's definitely a catchy catchphrase. So we're going to kick it over to Brad Smith next. And Brad is the president of Microsoft, and he is really one of the leading thinkers and doers in the country at this intersection of technology and society. So it's wonderful to be able to pull in his perspective to this discussion. Brad, over to you for some opening thoughts.
Well, thank you. And first, I just want to say thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Ted, thank you. I still have my bona fides here, my Wisconsin roots. Lily, it's always an honor to follow anybody from the National Education Association and just be able to participate in a conversation about what the nation's teachers do for all of us. Yeah, the first thing I would note here is that the issue we're here to discuss is just of profound importance. It's obviously of enormous impact to parents and kids and teachers across the country. But in many ways, I would say it's even bigger than that. I think one of the really defining values for this country has been a commitment to universal, free, high quality public education. It's an idea that was invented in Massachusetts in 1835. It quickly spread across the country. It's been part of the fabric of the country ever since. And it has probably never been under threat in real time the way it is as we think about going back to school this fall. Because while the title of this panel is the homework gap, and that's what we were all talking about a year ago, this fall, it's really not just about doing homework after school. Obviously, as we know, it's about going to class during school. So all of this is more important than we could have even imagined. Now, having said that, the divide we face is just enormous, and we should recognize how big a problem we need to solve. And this is a problem that is more impactful now than it was a year ago, but it was here a year ago as well. You can't do homework the way everybody else can if you happen to be in a home that doesn't have a broadband connection, that doesn't have a good computing device. And that's what we face in so many households across the country. And there's really two very different parts to this problem. That's what we at Microsoft have learned. One is a rural problem. There are a lot of rural communities where you cannot get a broadband connection, even if you can afford it, because it's just not available. And this is a problem that is impacting tens of millions of Americans, but in truth, we don't know precisely how many, because the federal government, no national organization, has a completely accurate map of the country in terms of broadband access. But there's an urban part of this as well. I think Milwaukee is a good example of this. If you just look at the city of Milwaukee, we do know that 39% of the households in the city lack a DSL or cable or other fixed broadband connection, 39%. And we know that the situation in Milwaukee is actually better than the situation in Miami and Baltimore and Detroit, Cleveland, El Paso, and a number of other cities. Now here, there's obviously broadband available, but it's an issue of affordability. It's beyond the reach of too many households. And we know, because we have good data that shows us, that this is a problem that has a disparate impact on parents and kids of color. African American and Black and Hispanic and Latino children all face this to a degree that white children do not. So when you think about every divide that we care about in this country, it is exacerbated by this digital divide, and now it is becoming an educational divide as well. So we so clearly need new action from the this fall. We need to do everything we can to get through this year, and then we do need to build back in a way that will give us a stronger foundation for the future to close the homework gap. And I will then just say, and to help teachers. Because our teachers today are facing a profound challenge as well. It's not just reaching kids who lack a broadband connection, it's figuring out how to teach a class when you don't have kids in the classroom. So more than almost anything we faced in recent years, this requires that we all pull together and take some hard steps quickly in order to have an impact. I think this conversation can help us take another step forward.
Thank you so much, Brad. And speaking of building back better, I think our next guest will have a lot to say about that. She's Carmel Martin, and she serves as a senior policy advisor to the Biden-Harris campaign. She's a leading expert in our country on education policy and has served in the executive branch, has served in the Senate committees, and has served with leading think tanks as well as on a lot of campaigns. And so we couldn't have a better guest to really walk us through some of the policy and political pieces of solving this gap. So over to you, Carmel.
Thanks so much, Ed. And I just want to start by thanking the host committee and Business Forward for organizing this critical conversation, and thank to everyone who's participating. It's a crazy time right now. I hope you're all keeping healthy, not just physically, but emotionally, since the times we're in are trying on both fronts. As Lily and Brad pointed out, this is one of many issues that the COVID pandemic has really brought to the forefront of the public debate, but it also is bringing to the forefront our understanding of the deep inequities that we have in our society. Tens of millions of students, nearly 44 million, are impacted by the gap in access to high quality remote learning. But as Brad said, students of color are more than twice as likely to report they don't have access to high speed internet compared with white students, and over half of rural students attribute the lack of high speed internet to being unable to complete online assignments. So, as Lily said, we really can't address this problem with putting the equity issues at the forefront of our response. So total agreement there. This is obviously something that state and local leaders are struggling with, and we know they need more resources to be able to address it. The CARES Act provided some resources and flexibility to address immediate gaps facing their community, but more funding and more support is critical to meet the need, which is far larger than the current funds will cover, and is going to be exacerbated because state and local revenues are going to be down based on the economic context that we sit in. The Trump administration's failure to do so really creates the risk of losing a year of learning. And this is more true for students of color, students from low-income families, students in rural areas who are less likely to have access to the tools that they need. We've seen local leaders and teachers and their unions representing them really getting innovative in terms of their response to this. Some school districts are deploying school buses as mobile hotspots. Others are partnering with community groups like Boys and Girls Clubs to open their doors for students to connect online and learn. And this is a national crisis. They need support on the federal level. So during this time of national crisis, the federal government really needs to step up and lead. The Trump administration instead has stepped back and deferred. They've long touted the benefits of remote learning, but they've been deafeningly silent on how best to support remote learning in a time of national need and on the now obvious shortcomings of this approach. In contrast, the Biden-Harris campaign has already presented a clear plan for how schools, teachers, and students can be supported during this crisis. The vice president released a roadmap, which includes, first and foremost, getting the virus under control. This needs to be a priority number one. Set national safety guidelines while empowering local decision-making based on science and local health conditions, providing emergency funding for schools and childcare providers, as well as flexible state and local aid. He's also called for ensuring that high quality learning during the pandemic, including virtual and hybrid approaches, and again laid out a roadmap there, including providing educators the dedicated time and resources to pursue professional development, ensuring that educators and students who are at greater risk of COVID-19 or live with families members who have tailored remote teaching assignments and educational plans, directing the resources of the White House to identify evidence-based policy solutions to address the homework gap. He's called for, under his administration, he would launch a COVID-19 Educational Equity Gap Challenge Grant program to encourage state governments to develop bold plans to adopt evidence-based policy recommendations to support all students. And probably should have started with this. What he's called for the current administration to do, and would certainly do himself, is to listen to educators, mental health professionals, and other experts so that the perspectives of our leaders in classrooms and schools are at the forefront of all our plans. But I guess in closing, I just want to say that, although COVID-19's really brought this to the forefront of the public consciousness and really brought home the challenge of inequitable access to high-speed internet devices and support, it's not a new issue, and it's not something that needs just a temporary fix, which is why the Biden-Harris campaign has called for tripling funding for Title I and fully funding IDEA. Through these consistent long-term investments, we think we can reverse the decades of underfunding of our schools and our communities, which has led us to the point we're at now. And we're also calling for new investments in school infrastructure and closing broadband gaps. And you can be assured that under a Biden-Harris administration, we'd have competent people at the U.S. Department of Education. And that's what we need in our nation's leadership right now. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ed, and thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Carmel. And now we're really able to open up our discussion for everyone here. And I'd like to remind people that are at home, if you'd like to submit a question, please email us at info@businessfwd.org, and we'll be able to read it out loud with our guest. I'm going to start out by really, what we've heard from folks on this panel is that there's a combination of factors that go into the challenges that we're facing. There's not any single one issue. It's really an issue of devices, of broadband, of having high quality curriculum, training for teachers and parents, digital literacy, the capacity of families to be able to work with their kids on these issues. And since there's not just one problem that could be identified, all of these really have to be worked on together. And the questions that we've received so far from people in the audience really reflect that. I want to get to a few of these. And Lily, I'm gonna get to you first with the first question. It may be our hardest one we have, so I apologize for that. But this comes from Bernita Crawford in Morrow, Georgia. And she asked, how can parents with kindergarten children who work from home balance their work and still monitor the child's distance learning? It's a dilemma for many. And as five-year-olds aren't that disciplined with their attention span, our schools are not yet safe to open. How can we address this? Lily, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you don't have any rocket science questions I could answer instead, because this is the dilemma of our time. And by the way, I've talked to my colleagues who are teachers who have small children in their home. So while they're teaching a Zoom class, they've got a kid tugging on their sleeve going, mommy, mommy. And so this is universal. And the first part of the answer is not helpful, but I have to say it. It didn't have to be this way. We are dealing with these prolonged situations where people are still working from home, kids are still learning from home. Why? Because we had no plan on the national level to actually deal with the COVID crisis. So we haven't moved past that the way some other countries that took it seriously 6-8 months ago did. And we're still in this. So something that we could have managed for a few months now has been much more than a few months. And you can lay that at the feet of Donald Trump and calling it fake news. And it was the Democrats. No, it's science, and you ignored it. And so at best, we're dealing with incompetence. But here's where the dark side of me has been going. Maybe some of this is intentional, because one of the things we do know about Donald Trump is he wants to get his jobs numbers up. And the last thing he wants is to have it be better managed to be able to continue distance learning until it's safe to go back to school. And so a lot of parents have been left without any support at all. A lot of teachers just trying to kludge things together as they go along. So here's the only practical advice that I have for parents of small children is, first of all, our hearts and prayers are with you. I have no magic wand that will make your 5-year-old all of a sudden be focused and paying attention on his or her own work while you're doing your own work. But I think it is a time to reach out to employers as well. And to be able to say to your employer, here's what I'm going through. We may be at a meeting and I may be working with my small child over here. We hope that you'll give us that grace. And I think, if anything, this pandemic has humanized all of us. We're all going through the same incredible trauma and stress and uncertainty and trying to just make it work. So reach out to your teachers, your students' teachers, but also reach out to your employer as well and ask for that grace and say, it's not going to look like it usually does. It's going to be different, but we've got to get through this together. We've got to humanize what we're going through right now because people can't just turn off work, and they just can't turn off their children either. It's going to be the hardest thing we ever do, to get through this in a way that folks understand the human cost of ignoring this pandemic so that we're still in this position.
Well, thank you, Lily. And that's a great transition really over to Brad. And we do have a follow-on question here from Alyssa Karalikas in Seattle, Washington. And she asked, how can businesses best support their employees who are working parents of school-age children? Brad, would love your thoughts on that, and how working families can handle this and juggle these multiple challenges that our country's facing.
Well, first of all, I think this frames the issue really well, and I just think it's almost impossible to understate the anxiety that I think a lot of parents with young children are facing right now. And while a convention is all about what's going to happen in November, this question is really all about what's going to happen in 2 to 3 weeks when school reopens, but not the typical way. I first think that as employers, we all have a responsibility to do everything we can to really support the people who work for us. I think if we fail to do that, we're not only just sort of undermining something that's important to the country, but we're going to risk losing people, because I think we're going to face a situation where people will feel compelled to leave the workforce, and that's going to be bad for everybody. So certainly as an employer, that's what we at Microsoft are focused on doing. It's providing benefits so that people can take paid leave if they feel that they cannot, work and take care of their children and support them at the same time. It's about asking everybody to chip in and enable people to adjust their working hours and just be more understanding and flexible. I think this really does call on all of us to think about the needs of other people. And so colleagues, each of us as individuals often have something that we can contribute as well. As an employer, we're taking an added step and looking at ways that we can organize other benefits. In terms of, say, people who want to have their child with 4 or 5 other children and be able to learn remotely, but learn together with some additional supervision. So we each should do what we can, and this is where I also always sort of hasten to say, and not every company can afford to do what we can as a big company. There's a lot of small businesses right now that are just treading water and keeping their head above water. So it's not realistic to expect every company to be able to do the same thing. I do think that there is a conversation that many communities will want to have in the coming weeks and months, because as we look at what it means to bring students back into a school building and a classroom, it may not make sense. It probably will not make sense, frankly, to bring back every grade in equal numbers. And so I think it makes sense to say, what, we should prioritize our youngest students. The science shows us that, as we've been working here in Washington State and with the University of Washington and the Institute for Disease Modeling, that the health risks are differentiated. It doesn't mean that they're not present, but the health risks are differentiated, and one can think a little more boldly about younger students. But more than that, these are the students who probably need to be in a classroom the most. And so I don't think this is going to be a normal school year where everybody starts on day one and finishes on the last day the same way. It may be more graduated, and I think it's a community by community conversation to be had.
Thanks, Brad. And Carmel, I'm going to kick it over to you. I know the campaign has done a lot of thinking on this issue, not just about the sort of immediate crisis, but longer term about supporting working families and as their kids are being educated. Would love just some of your thoughts on this family, the challenges for families in dealing with these multiple crises.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with everything that Lily and Brad said. I think there's much more that we need to do to make sure that families have access to broadband and that teachers have the tools that they need to be able to teach in this new hybrid environment or completely online environment, depending on the circumstances, and that parents have tools as well. And I think the Department of Education at the federal level, it's not their job to develop curriculum, but they do have lots of research and evidence about the best ways to engage people remotely via technology. And, I think we see a leadership void there in terms of supporting state and local actors and teachers and parents around how to most effectively engage in an online environment. And, I think part of the puzzle is asking employers to be flexible with their employees. But another huge piece of the puzzle, which I mentioned at the start, is making sure that people have access to high quality childcare and that those childcare providers are given the resources they need to operate safely, which is why Vice President Biden and Senator Harris have called for making sure that we're providing relief to school systems at the local level, but also to childcare providers so they can keep their doors open and weather this storm and help the rest of us weather the storm. They're such critical, frontline workers in that regard. And then, so they have a short-term plan as it relates to dealing with the short-term crisis, but also a long-term plan for building a stronger, high-quality, affordable childcare system so that everyone who's choosing to go to work, needs to go to work, has that opportunity, that support system in place, and provides critical developmental support for the children, but also make sure that the workers in that setting are getting fair pay and have opportunities for career ladders and are treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve.
I want to double dive down deep on this question around broadband access and devices. We've touched on that so far, but we're getting a lot of questions from people around questions around the broadband access, and is the federal government doing enough? Vic Bell in Detroit, Michigan asks, what federal funding is available to create the required infrastructure for citywide internet access so all students may engage in virtual classrooms? And we have another question from Dean Brenner in Washington, D.C. asking, isn't it essential for the millions of kids without connectivity devices or both that Congress appropriate dedicated funds ASAP so that schools can immediately provide all K through 12 students and teachers with devices and connectivity? So maybe I'll start with Brad on this one. Brad, can you kind of give us a sense of the state of the state of the union on devices and connectivity? Where are we, and what needs to be done in terms of an investment to close that particular gap?
Well, I think you've asked the key question, and I think the answer really is to recognize that the country, to some degree, needs different solutions in different places, in my opinion. In urban areas, the issue is not a lack of opportunity, it's just not affordable to too many families. And I think that's where we do need more federal spending to close the broadband gap. I think the smartest way, frankly, to spend federal money to subsidize, because that's what we need to do, is subsidize broadband access, is work effectively with the carriers, but really partner with schools and, say, healthcare providers. Because if we can work with schools, get devices into the hands of kids, work with healthcare providers so that patients have access to devices for telehealth medicine and the like, and then provide the broadband connectivity to go with it, we would probably put ourselves on a much faster path to close this gap much more quickly. And so, that should be, I think, job one. And I'm encouraged by Senator Markey, for example, who's recognized this with legislation, as well as a number of others. Now, then you also have to think about the rural communities. And here, the problem, if anything, is even bigger. There's probably even more people in rural America that lack broadband access. And I think here, I would say the first thing we should recognize is that we may not need the federal government to spend more money, but it sure needs to spend money a lot smarter than it has been. Every year, the federal government has been spending $8 billion to try to subsidize and close the broadband gap in rural counties. The first problem we have is we don't have a map. FDR figured out almost 100 years ago that if you wanted to bring electricity to every home, you had to start by figuring out what homes had electricity and what homes didn't. We don't have that today. And that's actually pretty atrocious, because that is a problem that can be solved. And thankfully, we're finally seeing Congress put ourselves on a path to solve it. Then second, we then, I think, really need to close the gap where it exists, provide the incentives for capital investments by telephone carriers. Microsoft's not one of these, but we work with companies that are. We have our own initiative that is bringing broadband to 3 million rural Americans that didn't have it before. And mostly what we've learned is that with the right targeted federal money, you can close this part of the gap over the next couple of years. It will take a couple of years, not a couple of months, because the infrastructure needs to be built out. And then we'll have a country that looks more similar in rural and urban communities alike, which is also a way of saying we'll still have some families in rural communities that can't afford this, and we'll have to figure out how to work with schools and healthcare providers and others to reach them as well. But this is a problem that can be solved. The country did it for telephones, it did it for electricity, it can do it for broadband as well.
Lily, what are you seeing? From the school perspective, would love your take.
Well, I kind of hinted at it in my opening comments, but there is a program that exists right now called E-Rate. And it has helped for years and years communities that aren't connected to get connected. And it's for schools, it's for libraries. And what we were very excited about in the HEROES Act that the House passed and is sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk right now, gathering dust, what it would do is it would immediately put more than $4 billion into the E-Rate program and give it more flexible use so that you could say, this is for community broadband. It's not just in the school building, because now teaching and learning is going on in homes. And so we are desperate for Congress to act on something. They don't have to sit around and study for years and years. We know that this program works. We know it makes broadband affordable. Let's make it affordable in people's communities, in their homes. And let's do it now. Let's do it today.
Carmel, I'd love to get you in on this. Yes.
Yeah, just to echo what Lily's saying and Brad said as well. I mean, I think in the short term, if we were able to get school districts additional resources to deal with the challenges that they're facing, they would help. It would help them to provide. They are providing hotspots to families, and but it's not a systemic approach to the problem. And in the short term, one way to address this would be to increase funding through the E-Rate programs. As Lily said, it doesn't require creation of a new program. It exists. Vice President Biden, even before the pandemic hit, had called for a $20 billion investment in making sure that every community had access to broadband, and tripling the Community Connect program that Lily was mentioning. And when you hear the Vice President talk about this, I think the thing that the way he frames it is consistent with what Brad said. This is really a critical component of our nation's infrastructure. It's something, high-speed internet is just as critical as high-speed rail. So we need to think about it that way. And so we need to, in the long term, be thinking about how we can build an infrastructure in our country that enables children to learn, but also enables our businesses to thrive and our society to thrive. So it's something that we have to find the short-term fix for this crisis that we're in, but we have to also lay out a plan for the future that doesn't leave us short-handed like we are right now with respect to this situation. So it's something that is going to be a top priority for the Biden-Harris administration.
Well, and sometimes you can have the fastest internet possible and still things are glitchy, as I think my feed in this video is glitchy. I've got 1 gig broadband hardline access, but I'm still glitchy. So I apologize about that for folks watching from home. I want to move to a question around curriculum and digital literacy. Paul Sawyer in my hometown of Dallas asks, why have schools been left out without a national digital resources program for each grade and course? Does there need to be a national digital literacy program that gets funded and pushed out to schools? What does our curriculum and training need to look like for teachers and for parents about implementing that? And maybe Lily, if I could start with you on that, I'd love to kick it over.
We don't have a national school system. Our school systems are state-based. It's where the broad funding comes from. Funding from the federal level is supposed to be targeted to vulnerable populations of children, special education, English language learners, children in poverty. It's been the civil rights mission of the Department of Education to say all children should be well served in their school, in their state school system. But and so it's not surprising that we don't have any national curriculum on social studies, on math, or on technology. But I was only a little tongue-in-cheek saying I have a master's in instruction instructional technology, which I got in the 80s and was technically out of date before the ink was dry. We need to start thinking about teacher training in terms of what it means to be a well-qualified, well-prepared educator. And that part and parcel, I don't care if you're teaching kindergarten or AP chemistry, part of your training as a good educator should be the use of technology in making sure that your students are engaged in every level. Technology is a tool. It's never a replacement for a good teacher, but in the hands of a teacher, how does technology enhance your ability to instruct and inspire and engage and get those little curious minds going? That's what's happening more and more. But it depends on which university you attended, whether or not this is part and parcel of teacher training. I think there is an appropriate role for the federal government in saying, here are the grants that you can receive from the federal government if a state is doing what they need to do to make sure that every teacher is qualified in the creative use of technology in their classrooms. It shouldn't just be once you get into the classroom, then you're on your own trying to figure things out and get your own training. It should be something that's recognized, that just like all good teachers should know class management, all good teachers should have a toolbox of what to do when children aren't engaged, or this doesn't work with this child, we're going to try something else. All teachers should be able to know the incredible uses of technology to enhance their instruction.
Thanks, Lily. Brad, would love to get you in on this. I've got a kid that's on Minecraft all day, every day, so would love your perspective on digital literacy.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is I think that the focus on curriculum is the right one, because obviously we need devices and connectivity for students, but we need a curriculum and so that kids can master digital skills. You know, everything about the economy tells us today, and then frankly, every year into the future, the jobs that are going to be most in demand and are going to pay the best are going to be jobs that have digital skills as part of them. And that doesn't mean they're necessarily creating software, but they do require the use of technology. And I think Lily hit the nail on the head. The biggest issue in some ways, in terms of difficulty and frankly cost, is equipping teachers with the skills that they will need in order to teach this curriculum. And so then you have to ask, well, how do we do that? How do we get computer science into our schools? How do we even get the AP courses for computer science into all of the nation's high schools? Well, the first thing I would say is we do think the federal government can and should do more. President Obama and Vice President Biden had an event in January of 2016. They launched an initiative that was called CS for All, Computer Science for All. And what it proposed was that Congress allocate $4 billion specifically to support the local school districts and states across the country so they could invest in teacher training. And we're far, far away from having anything like that level of federal support today. So what have we done? Well, we've tried to make up for the difference. There are some states that actually are now doing a great job in supporting teachers and getting computer science into the classroom. Rhode Island may not be the nation's biggest state, but it's really under Governor Raimondo at the forefront of getting computer science into every school. And they've created a model that increasingly other governors are looking at. But I would also say this too is an area where employers and tech companies and philanthropy can and should help. We have a program at Microsoft called Technology Education and Literacy in Schools. We're in 500 high schools today across the country in almost 25 states. And what we do is we work with other tech companies. We have more than 2,000 volunteers, people who then go into schools and they team teach with typically the math teacher or a science teacher, because these are folks who come from tech companies who understand technology, but they don't know how to teach. But they work with great teachers who lack the background that Lily obviously has in computer science. And so they work together for a year or two. And at the end of that period of time, the math teacher is also a great computer science teacher. So there's lots of innovative steps that we can take as a country to do more, but I do think it really requires more federal leadership and support.
Thanks, Brad. Carmel?
Yeah, so again, agree with everything Brad and Lily have said. We definitely need high quality materials, curriculum that are developed by teachers, culturally relevant, and meet the needs of all of our students, which, and we haven't talked much about this so far, but we need to, including the needs of students with disabilities, English language learners, students who have been left below grade level, that we need to make sure that as those materials are being developed, that we're thinking about unique challenges that some groups of students have. I mean, the challenges of teaching remotely is extremely difficult. It's exacerbated with respect to some students with disabilities who need more in-person support. We need to make sure that parents of English language learners who are going to be partners in the endeavor have the materials they need translated into the language that they operate in. And I would agree that the federal government needs to be respectful of the state and local role in curriculum and but there's still things they can do, including elevating best practices, identifying shared expectations and needs, and providing resources, as Brad and Lily have said, to help get us to economies of scale and scale up these endeavors. And also invest. One of the things that we need to do, which the Vice President and Senator Harris's policy in this area recognize, we need more investment at the federal level in research. We need to be, the technology is changing, it's dynamic. We need to be researching what works best and making sure that we're developing curriculum that's capitalizing on technology and giving teachers the resources they need to be able to effectively use it, as Lily said, as a tool, not as a replacement for a teacher.
Thanks, Carmel. And we just have about 3 minutes left. So I kind of want to finish with a little bit of, well, really just 1 minute each from you on a question around, we've received a lot of questions about the new normal and what does that really look like once we get past COVID. And would just love your thoughts on that. I think we've talked about the investments that we're making now are investments that will yield dividends down the road. And just from your vision, from each of your thoughts, what is this going to do, and what this crisis, once we get through it, what will the new normal look like? And I'll start with Lily on that one, and we'll go around Lily, Brad, and Carmel.
So I have resisted the word investment, and I've talked to so many reporters who say, like, this is our best investment and this is the foundation of the economy. And they're setting me up saying, so we're trying to be helpful. Our economy will get started because of education funding, because we'll be ready for the next century. To me, yes, to all of that, but it's so much more. This is a human and civil right. Every student deserves to have access and opportunity. And it's more than our economy, it's our democracy. It's, are you ready to be an informed, engaged citizen? Can you look at a commercial and tell if someone's trying to sell you something that it's true or it's not true? Why do you believe it? Are you a critical, creative thinker? So all of the above. Technology is an incredible tool. And when you have it available to certain kids because their parents live in a richer community, then you are denying the civil right of all children to have access and opportunity to what an education is going to mean in their lives. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think there's nothing more important we could be talking about than all students having what they need to succeed.
Thanks, Lily. Over to you, Brad, for your closing thoughts.
Well, I would just build on that. We need clear goals, and that needs to include broadband for every home, devices for every student, training for teachers in computer science and digital skills in every school. And these are achievable goals if we put the federal government and states and communities and the private sector to work together. These are things that we can accomplish in the next 4 years.
Thanks, Brad. Carmel?
Well, you probably won't be surprised to hear me say that I hope the new normal includes a country led by two people who understand what people are going through and who are committed to building back better, to addressing the short-term crisis, but at the same time, thinking about the long term and how we can build systems that ensure that every student has the opportunity, something Brad started with, has the opportunity for a high quality education. And as we build tools to help us in this moment of crisis, we appreciate that those tools will help teachers to more effectively support their students in the long term. So we shouldn't look at it in a short-sighted way, that this really is about addressing the short-term crisis, building back better, and making sure that we're a country that does elevate opportunity for all and address inequities in our country. So, and I just close by saying thanks so much for putting this together and letting me participate.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you at home for your tremendous questions. Thank you for putting up with our technical glitches. Imagine with all of our resources and still having technical glitches, imagine how hard it is for the schools all across our country to pull this kind of stuff off. So we appreciate it. I'd like to thank all of our panelists again. I'd like to thank the NEA. I'd like to thank Brad Smith, Carmel Martin, Ted Kellner for your support. And thank you for all of you that have joined us. You have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.